3 days after marrying her new husband, my ex-wife called me from a gas station off Chinden Boulevard, crying so hard she could barely speak. I watched the phone ring 4 times before answering, not to punish her. I was finishing my coffee. My name is Clifton Murphy. I'm 45, born and raised in Boise, Idaho. Until 11 months ago, I was married to Teresa. 14 years together, a house in the North End, with a porch swing I built myself. A dog named Eden who always chose her over me, which, looking back, should have been my first warning. Most people want me to jump straight to the divorce. I'm not going to. If I do, you'll never understand why it broke me, or why what happened later felt so satisfying. So stay with me. It all started on the second Sunday of April, the year I turned 44. That morning, my heart nearly gave out on a bridge 40 feet above the Boise River. 3 weeks later, my wife tried to finish what my body couldn't. One almost killed me. The other changed everything. I own a structural inspection company called Murphy Infrastructure Consulting. We work with the Idaho Transportation Department, several counties, and private developers who need honest answers about whether a bridge, parking garage, or pedestrian walkway is safe or one heavy load away from collapse. It's dirty work. Hard hat, steel-toe boots, freezing mornings under concrete and steel while everyone else drives by without a second glance. The reports I write usually collect dust until something fails. But that kind of work pays well. There aren't many engineers willing to crawl under bridges in an Idaho winter. My share alone clears over $150,000 a year, sometimes more. I have 2 employees, an old pickup that's survived longer than some of my nephews, and a bank account Teresa never cared enough to ask about. As far as she knew, I was just another guy earning a government paycheck with muddy boots. I never corrected her. My father built this company from scratch with nothing but grit and a slide rule. Before he died, he left me one lesson. Once money becomes dinner conversation, people start changing. He learned that watching his own brothers. So I kept driving the old truck, wore the same 3 flannel shirts, and let Teresa believe we were comfortable instead of wealthy. I met her at a wedding in McCall near Payette Lake when I was 30 and she was 27. Her laugh carried across the room, but what caught me was how closely she paid attention. She noticed I always ordered my steak medium instead of medium well. She caught me humming old Fleetwood Mac songs without realizing it. We ended up sitting together at the reception, and after our second drink she leaned over with a smile. "You're the quiet guy everyone keeps pointing at." I laughed. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" She shrugged. "Depends. What'd you do?" "I inspect bridges," I said. "Nothing exciting. Mostly I tell people whether their parking garage is about to eat their car." "That's probably the least romantic thing any man has ever said to me at a wedding," Teresa laughed. I smiled. "Give me time. I know plenty worse." That made her laugh even harder. And before the cake was cut, she asked for my number. No woman had ever done that before. Up until then, I was always the one asking, and usually getting turned down. For the first 6 or 7 years of our marriage, I truly believed she'd seen the parts of me everyone else overlooked. Then, somewhere around year 8, that changed. 2 years after we married, she opened a downtown hair salon called Teresa's. Not exactly a creative name, but business was steady. Steady just wasn't enough for her. Most of her new friends were married to orthopedic surgeons, real estate developers, and men who wore watches worth more than my truck. I still remember the first time I realized how she talked about me behind closed doors. At a party, one of her clients asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Teresa cut in. "Oh, he does something with bridges." I smiled politely. "Structural inspections. I make sure they don't fall down." "Right. That," she said, already turning back to another conversation. "Anyway, Cynthia, tell me more about the chalet." I stood there holding a warm beer, forgotten before I'd even finished my sentence. I laughed it off, because I still believed it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. The moment I knew something inside our marriage had broken came a few months later. My mother, Joan, 71 years old, drove over from Meridian with a casserole and offered to help me clean the gutters before Teresa's book club arrived. Teresa walked through the front door, spotted Mom's car, and sighed loud enough for everyone to hear. Great. Another guest I didn't invite. My mother froze. She never argued with anyone. I'm only helping Clifton with the gutters, she said softly. I'll stay out of your way. Teresa forced a smile that never reached her eyes. You're never in the way, Joan. It's just, tonight was supposed to be my space. 20 minutes later, my mother carried the untouched casserole back to her car and drove home. I stood in the kitchen, clenching my jaw. You didn't have to do that. Teresa looked at me without blinking. Do what? Set boundaries in my own house? It's my house too. And she's my mother. She gave a careless shrug. Maybe if your mother came around less, we wouldn't keep having this conversation. That was the first real crack. I didn't recognize it then, but cracks like that never close. They only spread. After that, we stopped being husband and wife and started acting like roommates with a shared mortgage. We still ate dinner at the same table. We still slept in the same bed, facing opposite sides. The small gestures disappeared, first the hand on my back, the random text saying she was thinking about me. What replaced them wasn't silence. It was constant irritation, disguised as ordinary conversation. Did you really wear that shirt to the Hendersons' party? Teresa asked one evening, yanking at my collar harder than she needed to. It's just a shirt, I said. It's a shirt that makes you look like you repair vending machines. I let that one slide, just like I let almost everything else slide. A few months later, I came down with the flu so badly I soaked the bed with sweat. Teresa stood in the bedroom doorway wearing her coat, car keys already in hand. I've got a color appointment in 20 minutes. There's NyQuil under the sink. Okay, I said. She paused only long enough to add, try not to make a mess, then walked out. I stared at the ceiling fan for a long time, wondering when the woman who used to bring me soup and sit beside me had quietly disappeared without either of us noticing. Not long after that, we were back at the Hendersons for another dinner party. Teresa spent the whole evening listening to couples talk about a 10-day anniversary trip to Sun Valley, private chalets, luxury spas, the kind of vacation everyone around that table seemed able to afford. On the drive home, she stayed silent until I knew something was coming. Diane's husband is taking her to Sun Valley for 10 days. Good for them. She looked at me. That's all you've got? What do you want me to say? I'd like to hear you say maybe we could do something like that. Just once, Clifton. I'd like to stop explaining why we're always keeping things simple. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. For one brief second, I almost told her the truth that I could have bought one of those chalets without losing a night's sleep. But my father's words stopped me. Never let money become the thing people love about you. So I swallowed it. We'll figure something out, I said instead. We both knew I wasn't answering her question. She turned toward the window and never spoke again during the drive home. Somewhere between that silence and the headlights cutting across the highway, I realized our marriage had become a contest I couldn't win no matter what I did. What I didn't realize was how much worse it was about to get. The bridge inspection that changed my life looked routine on paper. A pedestrian overpass over the Boise Greenbelt, Sunday morning. Light foot traffic. My lead inspector, Anthony Reyes, had been beside me for 11 years, long enough to become family. We were 40 feet above the river checking welds and load points when something inside my chest felt like it ripped wide open. Even now, I can replay every second of that morning as if it happened yesterday. The Boise River was running hard, with spring runoff, brown water churning beneath us, while cold mist clung to the steel. Anthony Reyes was a few feet to my left, dragging a tape measure across a support beam and, like always, complaining about his knees. I laughed at something he said. I wish I could remember the joke. Out of everything that happened that day, that's the one memory I can never get back, the last ordinary laugh of my old life. Then it hit. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't tightness. It felt like something inside my chest tore wide open. A burst of heat shot through me, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Cliff? Anthony called. Hey, look at me. You're gray. My knees folded. The safety harness dug into my shoulders as I dropped. I remember Anthony grabbing me. I remember the radio screaming for an ambulance. And for some reason, I remember how impossibly blue the sky looked above the bridge. 2 days later, I opened my eyes in the cardiac ICU at St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center. A breathing tube had just been removed, and Anthony was asleep in a chair that looked about 2 sizes too small for him. That afternoon, my surgeon, Dr. Samuel Ortiz walked in carrying my chart. He didn't waste time trying to comfort me with half-truths. "You suffered an aortic dissection," he said. "The main artery leaving your heart tore. Most people never make it to the operating room." My throat felt like sandpaper. "How bad was it?" "You were in surgery for nearly 7 hours. The first 48 hours afterward." He paused. "I wasn't confident you'd survive." He closed the chart and looked me in the eye. "But you're here. That's what matters. Can I work again?" "Eventually. Not tomorrow. And not the way you used to. You'll need rehab, regular checkups, and you'll be watched for the rest of your life. But a full recovery is possible." I let out a slow breath. "So I'm not dying?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Your body gave you a second chance. Don't waste it." A few days later, once I was strong enough, Anthony filled in the parts I couldn't remember. From the ambulance bay, he'd called Teresa because she was listed as my primary emergency contact. Whatever happened during that call, he has never repeated it. The only thing he ever admitted was that he told her I probably wouldn't make it through the night. Teresa reached St. Alphonsus a little after 8 that evening. Before Dr. Ortiz could take me into surgery, he needed my wife's consent. Anthony waited outside the consultation room and overheard most of the conversation. Dr. Ortiz told her exactly how serious it was. "This is a full aortic repair," he said. "Given the extent of the tear, I can't promise he'll survive the night. I need your signature either way, Doctor." Ortiz told her, "But I also need you to understand what tomorrow could look like." Anthony said. Teresa signed the consent form without asking a single question. She never asked about my chances, never asked if she could see me before surgery, never asked what would happen if I didn't make it. She signed her name, handed back the clipboard, and asked the nurse where the nearest restroom was. While I was unconscious a few doors away fighting for my life, my wife had already decided I wasn't coming home. Looking back, that hurts more than the scar running down my chest. During the first 2 weeks after surgery, Teresa visited exactly twice. The first time, she stood by the door instead of my bedside. She didn't ask me how I felt. She asked Anthony if I would ever be able to work again, or if I was headed for permanent disability. The second time, she brought paperwork from her attorney. "Just a few account updates while you're recovering," she said. I was still on oxygen and heavily medicated. I signed without reading a word. I trusted my wife. I had no idea one of those pages gave her temporary financial power of attorney. Less than 2 weeks later, she used it to begin one of the fastest divorce filings Ada County had seen that year, while I lay in a hospital bed believing she stayed away because she was too worried to face me. The truth was much colder. As far as Teresa understood, I was a sick contractor with a damaged heart, an old pickup, and a modest savings account. A man who might never work again. She wasn't preparing to care for an ill husband. She was preparing to leave one before the medical bills arrived. What she never realized was how badly she had misjudged me. 9 days after surgery, with heart monitors still tracking every beat, a woman I had never seen before walked into my room carrying a large manila envelope. "Clifton Murphy?" she asked. "You've been served." I just stared at her. Anthony shot out of his chair so fast he knocked over his coffee. "Served with what?" he demanded. "Divorce papers. Ada County District Court." She handed me the envelope, turned around, and walked out without another word. My hands shook as I read through the petition. Irreconcilable differences. Request for the house. Request for the 2019 Chevy Tahoe. Then the line that made my stomach drop. Teresa's attorney had requested an expedited hearing because my medical condition could delay the proceedings. In plain English, she wanted the divorce finished before I was healthy enough to fight back and before I was strong enough to start asking questions about our money. Anthony looked at me, then back at the paperwork. "She filed while you were unconscious." I watched the disbelief drain from his face, replaced by something harder. In that moment, 14 years of holidays, cookouts, and shared memories suddenly looked very different to both of us. "Cliff, she filed while you were unconscious." Anthony's words hung in the room. I didn't answer. The only sound was my heart monitor, beeping away as if nothing had happened. That's the thing about real betrayal. It doesn't arrive with dramatic speeches or warning signs. It shows up in a legal envelope while you're lying in a hospital bed wondering if you'll ever walk out alive. That afternoon, I called my attorney, Grace Whitman. She'd handled my company's contracts for nearly 10 years and insisted on coming to the hospital instead of talking over the phone. The moment she sat beside my bed, I knew this was worse than I thought. She spread the divorce papers across my blanket and read every page twice before saying a word. Finally, she tapped one document with her finger. I need you to tell me exactly what Teresa had you sign while you were on pain medication. She said it was paperwork for the accounts, so the bills would keep getting paid. Grace looked directly at me. Do you remember seeing the words power of attorney anywhere? I searched my memory and came up empty. Those days were a blur of painkillers, machines, and fluorescent lights. Grace didn't need my answer. She already knew. Clifton, this isn't just a divorce. She's trying to finish everything before you're healthy enough to object. That power of attorney has already been used. 2 accounts have been closed, and she started transferring the title to your truck. I stared at her. While I was still on a ventilator? Yes. She didn't soften it. I've handled ugly divorces for years. I've never seen someone rush to file against a man who was still attached to a cardiac monitor. So what happens now? Grace closed the folder. She'll keep pushing until it's finalized. But legally, this case is built on sand. The dates alone tell the story. You were in a medically induced coma. Documents were signed while you were heavily medicated. She tried to divide assets before you could even appear in court. Any judge who looks closely will see the problem. She leaned forward. Right now, she's gambling that you'll stay too sick to fight back. A small smile crossed her face. She's about to lose that bet. At the time, I still didn't understand what Teresa really believed. She had already decided I was a dying man with nothing left to offer. She wasn't ending a marriage. She was cashing out before the funeral. The divorce moved through the system faster than Grace had ever seen, helped by the simple fact that I was physically incapable of showing up during those first weeks. By the time I could finally sit in a chair without getting dizzy, Teresa Murphy had legally become Teresa Lang again. She walked away believing she'd won the house, the Tahoe, and everything 14 years of marriage had built. On paper, she had. What she didn't know was that Murphy Infrastructure Consulting was worth far more than any of those things. The company held a rolling 5-year state contract worth millions over its lifetime, and because I'd always kept the business finances private, Teresa had never once seen the real numbers. She thought she had taken everything. In reality, she had walked away from the most valuable thing we owned without even realizing it. My father's advice had protected exactly what he hoped it would. Teresa divorced a man she believed was broke, sick, and headed for an early grave. She had no idea she'd walked away from the most valuable asset we owned. 12 days after I was served with divorce papers. I remember the number because grief makes you count everything. Teresa married a man named Walter Combs at the courthouse in Eagle, just outside Boise. I didn't learn about it from her. Anthony walked into the outpatient rehab center holding his phone like it was bad news wrapped in glass. Before you look at this, he said, remember your blood pressure still matters. Anthony, what is it? Without answering, he turned the screen toward me. There she was. Teresa, wearing a champagne-colored dress, standing beside a silver-haired man in an expensive linen suit. Both of them were laughing beneath strings of lights. The caption read, New chapter. Same sparkle. Who is he? I asked, even though I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Walter Combs, real estate developer. They got married yesterday. I read the caption again, then once more, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. 12 days, I finally said. It's been 12 days. Anthony nodded quietly. I was still learning how to sit upright without exhausting myself, and my ex-wife already had a new husband. For once, Anthony didn't try to cheer me up. He just sat beside me and let the silence do its job. Later, I learned Walter was 51, a successful real estate developer building luxury townhomes along the Boise River, the kind of man Teresa's salon friends admired. Through Anthony's wife, I eventually found out Teresa had met him at a Chamber of Commerce mixer about 4 months before my surgery. 4 months. You can do the math yourself. I stared at that wedding photo longer than I should have, waiting to feel anger. Instead, I felt relief. For years, I'd wondered if I wasn't enough. Too ordinary, too quiet, too boring. That picture answered every question I'd been asking myself. It was never about me falling short. I was simply useful until someone she liked better came along. That night, I called my mother. I didn't know who else to tell. Joan Murphy never raised her voice, but when I told her Teresa had already remarried, something in her tone turned colder than I'd ever heard before, even colder than the night we lost my father. She married someone else? Already? She repeated. It wasn't disbelief. She was giving herself time to process it. Mom, she met him 4 months before my surgery. There was a long silence. You're telling me she was seeing another man while she was still living in your house? Looks that way. Another pause. Then she spoke so quietly it hurt. I cleaned her gutters, Clifton. I carried that woman a casserole because I thought she needed support. I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. She couldn't wait for me to leave. And all this time. I know, I said. She took a slow breath before answering. The moment those doctors discharge you, you're coming home with me. And don't waste your energy arguing. I didn't. I didn't have the strength, and for the first time in weeks, I realized I didn't have to face any of it alone. 3 weeks later, I was finally discharged with titanium wires holding my chest together and a folder full of cardiac rehab appointments tucked under my arm. I moved into my mother's house in Meridian because the North End home, the porch swing I'd built with my own hands, the gutters Mom had helped me clean now belonged, at least on paper, to the woman who'd replaced me before I'd even learned to breathe without a machine. What Teresa didn't know was that she'd made one mistake big enough to unravel everything she'd planned. Cardiac rehab is painfully slow. You spend hours walking on a treadmill at a speed that barely qualifies as movement, leaving your mind free to replay every bad decision you've ever made. Anthony came with me almost every Saturday. He'd sit by the window, pretending to scroll through his phone while keeping one eye on my heart monitor the entire time. One morning he finally asked, "You've been awfully quiet. Just thinking. About Teresa?" I nodded. About how I let one person spend 14 years convincing me I wasn't enough. I built a business nobody could push around, but somehow I let it happen in my own home. Anthony looked at me. "You loved her." I shook my head. I loved the woman I thought I married. I'm not sure she still existed after the first few years. The treadmill crawled forward while I watched the numbers change one painful step at a time. Feels like I'm recovering from 2 surgeries, I said. One on my heart, and one on my pride. Anthony didn't offer a speech. He simply nodded and stayed in the chair beside me. Sometimes that's all a friend needs to do. During those long weeks, Grace Whitman finally walked me through what Teresa's rushed divorce actually meant. Legally, it wasn't nearly as airtight as she believed. Idaho judges don't look kindly on asset transfers signed by someone heavily medicated, recovering from emergency heart surgery, and acting under a questionable power of attorney. Grace filed a motion to reopen the settlement using my medical records, the timeline, and the unauthorized account transfers. It wouldn't happen overnight, but she was confident we'd win. As she put it, anyone who understood the law could see the case was built to collapse. Neither Teresa nor her new husband realized it yet. They had much bigger problems coming. About 6 weeks after the courthouse wedding, Anthony called. I could tell from the first word he was trying very hard not to laugh. "You sitting down?" "Doctor's orders," I said. "I'm always sitting down." Rivercrest Landing, Walter's luxury development. My stomach tightened. "What about it?" "One of the retaining walls failed last night after the spring runoff. Half the riverbank slid into the parking garage." "Anyone hurt?" "No. Empty building." But the county shut the whole project down this morning and ordered an independent structural inspection. I knew exactly where this was going before he said another word. "They hired another engineering firm for the original approvals," Anthony continued. "But now the county engineering board is recommending someone else for the independent review." He paused just long enough to enjoy it. "Guess whose name is at the top of the list?" I never asked for revenge. I never went looking for it. 2 days later, Anthony called again, barely able to contain himself. And I knew before he spoke that fate wasn't finished with Walter Combs or Teresa Lang. 2 days later, Anthony called again, barely containing himself. "Cliff, you need to hear this." The state's putting together an emergency contractor list. I stayed as far away from the project as possible. There was an obvious conflict of interest, and Grace would have thrown me out of my own office if I'd tried to get involved. I didn't need to be on the inspection team to know how it ended. The independent review was brutal. Investigators found shortcuts in the soil compaction and drainage system, exactly the kind of mistakes my company would have caught before construction ever started. Walter had rushed the job to meet his deadlines, and now the bill had come due. Within weeks, 3 lenders pulled their financing. 2 major lawsuits followed. By early fall, Walter Combs filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Teresa had divorced the man she believed was dying and broke, only to marry the man she thought was successful and untouchable. She'd misjudged both of us. Boise isn't a big city. News travels fast, especially through a downtown hair salon where clients spend hours talking. Before long, everyone knew about Walter's failed development. No one blamed Teresa for the collapse, but gossip doesn't need facts to spread. Appointments at her salon started disappearing. Friends who had celebrated her new marriage quietly stopped returning her calls. The same people who'd admired Walter's success suddenly acted like they'd never known him. While their world was falling apart, mine was quietly rebuilding itself. The state came up for its 5-year contract renewal with Murphy Infrastructure Consulting that same fall. Thanks to our spotless safety record, and thanks to every agency suddenly wanting inspectors who actually refused to cut corners, the contract wasn't just renewed, it was expanded. We picked up 2 additional counties and became one of the state's largest structural inspection firms. A regional engineering magazine even ran a feature about the company under the headline, "Boise's Quiet Bridge Doctor." The photo showed me standing in front of the Broadway Bridge, thinner than before, leaning on a cane, but very much alive. 8 months earlier, most people would have bet I wouldn't survive. That article eventually reached exactly the person it was meant to. 3 days after Walter's bankruptcy became public, my phone rang at 9:40 on a Thursday night. Teresa's name flashed across the screen for the first time since the divorce. I let it ring 4 times before answering, not out of revenge, but because I honestly needed those few seconds to decide whether she deserved to hear my voice. "Clifton," she whispered, already crying, "I need to talk to you." "About what, Teresa?" "I saw the article." "About your company. About the state contract." She stopped to catch her breath. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of that. You never told me." I leaned back in my chair. "You never asked." Silence. Then she finally said the words I'd been waiting months to hear. "I thought you were dying." There it was. The truth. "The doctors said you might not make it," she continued through tears. I panicked. I thought I was going to be 42, alone, with a house I couldn't afford and a husband whose business barely made enough to survive. Those words told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't left because she stopped loving me. She'd left because she thought there was nothing left to gain. And Walter looked like a safe bet. I said quietly. Silence. Then Teresa whispered, "I made a mistake." Her voice was barely holding together. "Walter's filing for bankruptcy. The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings on our house, the one we bought together. I have nowhere to go, Clifton. I have nothing." I sat on my mother's back porch, looking toward the Boise foothills, thinking about the porch swing I'd built with my own hands at the house I'd once called home. "Clifton, please. We were happy once. Remember McCall? Remember our wedding? Remember us?" "I remember all of it," I said. "Every year. And I remember the year you decided I wasn't worth staying for." She tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. "You didn't leave because you stopped loving me. You left because you thought Walter had money, and I didn't. You walked away from your husband while he was connected to a heart monitor because you believed someone else offered a better future. Now he's lost everything, and suddenly you remember our past. That's not fair." "No," I said, cutting her off. What wasn't fair was being served with divorce papers in the ICU before I could even stand on my own. What wasn't fair was learning my marriage was over from a legal envelope while I still had tubes coming out of my chest. She cried without saying another word. This time it sounded real. "I have nowhere else to turn," she whispered. "Please." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I know, and I meant it. I truly hope your life gets better, Teresa, but it won't be with me." Then I ended the call. I didn't block her that night. I did it the next morning over a cup of coffee, as calmly as deleting the number of a business I'd never need again. 2 months later, Grace called with the court's decision. The judge ruled completely in your favor, she said. The settlement has been reopened. The court found the original agreement was executed in bad faith while you were medically incapacitated. You're receiving a substantially larger share of the marital assets. It was never about the money, I told her. Grace laughed softly. I know. It was about making sure what happened to you never became acceptable. She paused before asking, So, how do you feel? I looked out the window before answering. Lighter. I hadn't fought because I wanted revenge. I fought because someone had tried to take advantage of me when I was too sick to defend myself, and I refused to let that become the final chapter of my story. Once everything was settled, I sold my share of the old North End house instead of moving back in. Some homes carry too many painful memories to ever feel like home again. Instead, I bought a modest cabin near McCall, not far from the lake where Teresa and I first met. Maybe that sounds ironic. I prefer to think I refused to let one person ruin a place I loved long before I ever met her. Anthony and his family come up almost every weekend. My mother has her own bedroom there now, and no one will ever make her feel like an unwelcome guest again. Murphy Infrastructure Consulting has grown to 4 employees. The state contracts keep expanding, and I still spend my days crawling under bridges most people never notice. My cardiologist says my heart is stronger than men 15 years younger. For the first time in a long time, I believe him too. These days, my cardiologist says the biggest reason my heart keeps getting stronger is simple. I finally have a life peaceful enough to let it rest. The last update I heard was that Teresa had moved back in with her parents outside Nampa after Walter's bankruptcy. Her salon closed a few months later. I don't wish her misery. I honestly don't. But I also don't spend my days wondering what became of her. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. It just means you stop carrying the weight. What I learned sitting on a different porch, looking across a different lake, is this. Some people only measure your value by what they think they can gain from you. The moment they believe there's nothing left to take, they leave. And if they ever come back, it's often because they finally realized what they walked away from, not because love returned, but because the math changed. For 14 years, the person who should have known me best underestimated me. In the end, that became my greatest advantage. Teresa never cared enough to ask what my company was worth. She never looked beyond the old truck, the worn flannel shirts, or the muddy work boots. She built her future on assumptions, and as someone who's spent a lifetime inspecting structures, I can tell you that nothing built on a weak foundation stands for long. Last Saturday, Anthony drove up to McCall with his family. We grilled fresh trout by the lake while the sun disappeared behind the mountains. My mother sat in her favorite chair, telling one of her old stories about my father, and everyone listened like it was the first time they'd heard it. Eden, who, thanks to the settlement, came home with me and remains the best thing I won in court, slept across my boots the entire evening. Anthony watched the sunset for a while before saying, "You look good, Cliff. Better than I've seen you in years." I smiled. Most days I feel that way. Do you ever think about Teresa? Sometimes, I admitted, scratching behind Eden's ears. Just not the way I used to. These days, I don't think about what I lost. I think about how close I came to spending the rest of my life with someone who only saw my value through a calculator. And I'm strangely grateful my failing heart exposed the truth before the rest of my life slipped away with it. I never needed Teresa to recognize my worth for it to exist. I only needed enough time to recover, rebuild, and discover it for myself.